She had $100 million in the bank and 0 people she could call at midnight when everything fell apart. He had $17 in his wallet, a 6-year-old daughter at home with a babysitter, and absolutely no idea the woman sitting across from him could buy the entire restaurant, and the block it stood on. It started as a blind date. 1 hour. Polite conversation. An easy exit. But the storm that rolled in off the Atlantic that night had other plans. And before it was over, the most powerful woman in the country was going to tell a stranger the one secret she'd never told anyone. If stories like this hit different for you, hit that subscribe button and drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like the video, share it with someone who needs it tonight, and stay until the very end, because what happens between these two people is something you will not see coming. The reservation was under a fake name. That was the first thing Ethan Cole noticed when he arrived at Maison Verlaine 20 minutes early. The hostess checked her list twice, frowned slightly, and then led him to a corner table near the window with the kind of careful attention that suggested someone important had called ahead. The table was partially screened from the rest of the dining room by a tall arrangement of dried olive branches in a ceramic urn. Private, without being obvious about it. Ethan sat down, looked at the menu, and felt immediately underdressed. He was wearing the navy blazer he kept for funerals and job interviews. It was fine. The blazer was fine. But the restaurant was the kind of place where the water glasses had a stem and the butter came in a small white ramekin with a curl on top like someone had taken their time with it. He set the menu down, picked it up again, put it back. His phone buzzed. How's the blind date setup going? His friend Marcus, who had arranged the whole thing, apparently couldn't help himself. Ethan typed back, I'm early, place is fancy. Why didn't you warn me about the restaurant? I said upscale. This isn't upscale, Marcus. This is a different zip code. Relax. She's normal. You'll like her. What does she do again? Business stuff. Just talk to her like a person. Ethan pocketed the phone. Business stuff. He appreciated the specificity. He'd agreed to this because Marcus had been on him for almost a year about getting back out there. Ethan's ex-wife, Diane, had left when Mia was 3. Not dramatically. No screaming, no thrown dishes. Just a quiet, incremental withdrawal over about 8 months. Until one morning she was simply gone, leaving a note on the kitchen counter that said she wasn't built for this kind of life, and she was sorry. Mia was too young to understand. Ethan was too exhausted to fall apart properly. He'd just kept moving. That was 3 years ago. Mia was 6 now, and asked sometimes about her mother with the casual directness of a child who hadn't yet learned that some questions were supposed to hurt. Ethan answered honestly when he could, and changed the subject when he couldn't. He was doing fine. That was the accurate word. Fine. Not happy, not miserable, fine. He went to work, he picked Mia up from school, he made dinner, he helped with homework, he read the same 4 picture books in rotation because Mia had opinions about variety, and somewhere in there he stopped thinking about himself as a person who had a life separate from the logistics of keeping everything running. Marcus called this a problem. Ethan called it Tuesday. Mr. Cole! He looked up. The hostess was back, and beside her stood a woman who made the corner table and the dried olive branches and the butter curl all make sudden complete sense. She was tall, maybe 5'8" without the heels, which added another 2 inches. Dark hair pulled back from her face in a way that looked effortless and wasn't. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a black top, no jewelry except small gold studs at her ears, and she was carrying a slim phone in one hand and nothing else. No bag, no coat. She'd arrived in a car, Ethan realized. Someone had dropped her off. She scanned the table, saw him, and something in her expression shifted. Not relief exactly. More like recalibration. Hi, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. She paused for a fraction of a second. Addie. Ethan. He reached across to shake her hand and she took it briefly, her grip firm and fast, like she was used to handshakes being a transaction rather than a greeting. Nice to meet you. You too. She glanced at the menu without opening it, then looked back at him. You're early. Habit. He'd spent 8 years in emergency response, first on a wildfire team in Colorado and then with an urban rescue unit in New York. Early was a reflex. Being late somewhere meant someone else was already ahead of the problem. Good habit, she said, and flagged down a server without looking around for one, the way people do when they're accustomed to being noticed. She ordered sparkling water and the house white without consulting the menu. Then she looked back at Ethan like she was picking up a conversation they'd already started. "Marcus said you're in rescue work?" "Was," he said. "I transitioned out about 2 years ago. I do consulting now, safety assessment, crisis response planning for corporate clients." He paused. "It pays better, and I'm home for dinner." Something flickered across her face. It was brief, and he might have missed it if he hadn't spent years reading people under pressure. Not pity, something closer to recognition. "That matters," she said. "Being home for dinner. You have kids?" "No." She said it cleanly, no apology in it. "I don't have—" She stopped, rearranged. "My life isn't really structured for it." "What does your life look like?" he asked. Not to be polite. He actually wanted to know. She studied him for a moment. Long days, a lot of decisions, some travel. She tilted her head slightly. "What did Marcus tell you about me?" "Business stuff," Ethan said. She laughed. It was sudden and real, a short, unguarded sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised him. "That's all?" "That you were normal and I'd like you." "High bar," she said dryly. "I clear normal on a good day." She picked up her water glass. "You told me you had a daughter." "Mia, she's 6. He pulled out his phone before he could think better of it and turned it to show her the lock screen. Mia, at the beach last August, completely soaked, holding up a horseshoe crab with the expression of someone who has just discovered the greatest thing that has ever existed. She found that on the shore, spent the next 45 minutes asking me if we could keep it. Adeline, because that was who she was, though he didn't know it yet, looked at the photo, really looked at it. "What did you tell her?" "I told her the crab had a family, and if we took it home, they'd be sad." He pocketed the phone. She thought about that for a minute and then put it back in the water very gently and said goodbye to it. Adeline was quiet for a second. "That's a good answer." "It worked," he said, "which is all you can really ask for with a 6-year-old. The server came back. They ordered. Ethan picked the salmon because it was in the middle of the price range and he had some dignity, and Adeline ordered the duck without looking at the price, which told him something. They talked. It was easier than he'd expected. She was direct without being aggressive, sharp without performing it. She asked questions and listened to the answers, which was rarer than it should have been. She didn't fill silences by talking about herself the way a lot of people did on first dates. That anxious self-promotion that was less about connection and more about managing the impression being formed. She seemed comfortable with pauses, like someone who spent most of her time in rooms where silence was something to fill with decisions, and had learned to let it exist without panic. He liked that. What he didn't notice, because he had no reason to look, was the table 3 removed from theirs where 2 men in dark suits had been nursing the same drink since before he arrived, or the way Adeline's eyes moved briefly to the entrance every time the door opened, or the way her left hand, resting on the table, was not entirely still. The rain started around 8, not the polite city drizzle that New Yorkers walked through without bothering with umbrellas. This came in sideways, sudden and heavy, the kind of rain that rewrites plans. The restaurant's front windows turned dark and blurred. Lightning split the sky over the Hudson, and the lights in the dining room flickered once, twice, then steadied. Adeline's phone, face down on the edge of the table, lit up. She glanced at it, and something changed in her face. The composure was still there. She didn't drop it, but something behind it shifted, tightened. "Excuse me." She stood and walked toward the back of the restaurant, phone to her ear. Ethan refilled his water glass and watched the storm outside. The street below had emptied in under 2 minutes, the way New York streets do when serious weather hits. One moment crowded, the next abandoned. A taxi sat at the corner with its hazard lights on, going nowhere. She was back in 4 minutes. She sat down, placed her phone face down again, and picked up her wine glass. Took a slow sip. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Fine." She said it the way people say it when it is very much not fine, but they've made a decision not to involve you in that yet. He let it go. They'd known each other for an hour. The server appeared at the table with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, We just received word from the transit authority. 2 of the main subway lines are suspended. There's significant street flooding on the west side. He looked at Adeline. Ms. He caught himself. Ma'am, we also received a call for your party. Your driver is reporting the FDR is closed. He's advised it could be several hours. Adeline set her wine glass down very carefully. I see, she said. Ethan looked out the window. The rain had, if anything, gotten worse. He tried his phone and found 2 missed calls from Marcus and a text from the babysitter. Storm is bad. I can stay the night if you need. Mia is asleep. He texted back a thank you and pocketed the phone. Where do you live? Adeline asked. Brooklyn. You? Upper East Side. She looked at the window, then back at him. She seemed to be calculating something. There's a hotel attached to this building. I've stayed here before. She paused. I know that sounds practical, he said. It sounds practical. She blinked. Yes, exactly. She seemed to have expected him to be weird about it. I'll get 2 rooms. I can cover my own room, he said. I'm sure you can, she said, without any edge in it. But I have a corporate account here, and it's genuinely not a thing. She looked at him steadily. This isn't, I know, he said. Thank you. Something in her expression loosened, almost imperceptibly. They moved through the connecting lobby to the hotel desk. The woman at the front checked the system and looked up with the carefully neutral expression of someone about to deliver bad news to people who might not take it well. We have availability, she said, but I'm afraid with the storm. We've had a surge of bookings in the last 30 minutes. We have 1 junior suite remaining. Silence. 1 room, Adeline said. Yes, ma'am. It has a full sitting area and a pull-out sofa, as well as the main bedroom. That's fine, Ethan said. He looked at Adeline. If you're okay with it, I can sleep on a pull-out. I've slept on significantly worse. She considered him for a moment with that recalibrating look she'd given him at the restaurant table, like she was checking something. Okay, she said. The suite was on the 14th floor. It was nice without being ostentatious. A real sitting room with a couch and a coffee table, and a window that looked directly out at the storm. The city below was all blurred yellow light and dark water. Adeline stood at the window for a moment with her arms crossed, not quite hugging herself. Then she seemed to remember he was there and turned. I should tell you something, she said. He waited. My name isn't Addie. A beat. I mean, people who know me well call me that, but my full name is Adeline Hart. He looked at her. The name was familiar the way certain names are when you've seen them on financial news you don't actually read, but absorb anyway. Hart International, the logistics and infrastructure conglomerate. He'd done safety assessments for 2 of their smaller subsidiaries and hadn't put the name together until this exact moment. Okay, he said. She watched him, waiting for the reaction. The recalibration, maybe. The shift in posture that happened when people found out. He'd seen it happen with money before. The way a room changed when it entered. Okay? She repeated. I mean, he sat down on the couch and looked up at her. It explains the table. She stared at him for a second. Then, slowly, she sat down on the other end of the couch. Outside, lightning broke the sky in half and the thunder followed it 3 seconds later, close enough to feel in the walls. Most people, she started. I'm not most people, he said. Not like a line, just a fact. She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the sense that she was deciding something. Not about him specifically, about whether tonight was going to be what she'd been told it might be, or whether it was going to be what most things turned into. Performance, angle, agenda. Marcus didn't tell you, she said. It wasn't a question. Genuinely just said business stuff. She let out a long, slow breath, set her phone down on the coffee table, face down again. He noticed her thumb had been pressing against the case. Why the fake name? He asked. At the restaurant. I stopped using my full name on first meetings about 4 years ago. She looked at her hands. It changes how people talk to you, what they say, what they want. She paused. It gets exhausting. I imagine. You're not going to ask me how much money I have. No. or what it's like. Not tonight, he said. We just met. She turned her head and looked at him sideways. Something in that look was complicated. Relief and wariness occupying the same space, which he was beginning to understand was probably her default setting. The storm pressed against the glass. Tell me about Mia, she said, and the way she said it was different from how she'd said everything else that night. Quieter, without the careful levelness she maintained over most things. So he told her. Not the summary version, the real version, with the details that didn't matter to anyone except him. The way Mia sorted her breakfast cereal by color before eating it. The fact that she'd become obsessed with weather and could currently tell you the difference between a cumulonimbus and a cirrostratus with complete confidence and some attitude if you got it wrong. The way she laughed, loud and from somewhere below her ribs, a sound that had no self-consciousness in it at all, and how Ethan was quietly terrified of the day she'd learned to make herself smaller to fit what other people expected. Adeline listened. She didn't perform listening. She actually did it, the way she had over dinner, with her full attention, without filling the gaps. You're scared of a lot of things for her, she said when he stopped. Yeah. He looked at the window. I guess I am. But not for yourself? He thought about it honestly. I got good at managing it. After a while, the fear becomes background noise. You know it's there, but you stop letting it drive. He paused. Mia doesn't know how to do that yet. She just feels it all. That's not a bad thing, Adeline said quietly. Feeling it all. No, he said. It's not. The city below was dark and wet and not going anywhere. He reached over to the side table and turned on the small lamp. The room went amber. Adeline looked at her phone once, then set it face down again, then seemed slowly to decide to leave it there. I have a problem, she said. Not like a confession. Like someone who had been carrying a weight so long they'd stopped noticing what putting it down might feel like. He waited. Someone inside my company is trying to take it from me. She said it evenly, like a weather report. I've known for about 6 weeks. I don't know who to trust. I haven't told anyone. She paused. I came tonight because I needed 1 hour with a person who didn't know me, just to remember what that was like. The rain came down outside. Traffic sounds had faded to almost nothing. The city had gone quiet the way it only did when something larger than it was in charge. Okay, Ethan said. You keep saying that. Because most things actually are, he said. Or they get there eventually. She looked at him, and for the first time that evening she looked her age. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a 30-year-old woman sitting on a hotel couch in a borrowed night, tired in a way that went past sleep. You're strange, she said. My daughter says that too, he told her. She means it as a compliment. Outside, the storm settled in for the long haul, and neither of them made a move toward the bedroom or the pull-out sofa, because somewhere in the last 20 minutes the conversation had become something neither of them wanted to interrupt yet. The lamp cast a low amber circle across the coffee table, and outside the 14th floor window, the storm had settled into something sustained and patient. Not the violent opening act of an hour ago, but the long, heavy middle of a serious night. Rain moved in sheets across the glass. The city below existed only as smears of yellow and red, brake lights and street lamps, and the occasional blue flash of emergency vehicles moving through flooded streets. Adeline had taken off her heels somewhere in the last 20 minutes. She was sitting sideways on the couch now, feet tucked under her, which was such a human, unguarded thing to do that Ethan had noticed it and deliberately said nothing. She held her wine glass, pecked. The hotel had sent up a bottle when she called down, because of course they had, with both hands around the stem, not drinking it so much as holding it. 6 weeks, Ethan said. He'd been processing what she'd told him. 6 weeks since I knew for certain. Longer since something started feeling wrong. She turned the glass slowly. You know when something's off before you can name it? When the numbers land the way they should, but the pattern underneath them doesn't? Yeah, he said. I know that feeling. I started keeping a separate file on my personal laptop. Screenshots, timestamps, transaction records that didn't quite line up. Nothing that would hold up in a boardroom yet. She paused. Nothing I could take to anyone inside the company without risking showing my hand before I understood what hand I was playing against. How bad is it? She was quiet for a moment. Bad enough that if they move before I'm ready, I lose. She said it without drama, which somehow made it worse. Heart International isn't just a company I run. I built it. From a mid-sized logistics firm my father left half functioning and half in debt. It took 7 years to make it what it is. She finally took a sip of her wine. So yes, it's bad. Who do you think it is? He asked. She looked at him sideways. I shouldn't be telling you any of this. Probably not, he agreed. You're a stranger. I am. She looked back at the window. Victor Kane. He's been on the executive board since before I took over. He was my father's choice, not mine. We've had, she seemed to select her word carefully, a functional relationship for years. Civil, professional. He thought I'd fail in the first 18 months, and when I didn't, he adjusted his expectations and kept being professionally civil. She paused. But something shifted about 4 months ago. Small things. The way he responded in meetings, who he talked to and who he stopped talking to. Certain conversations that ended when I walked into a room. He started building something, Ethan said. Yes. She set her glass on the coffee table. The question is, how far along it is. Ethan leaned back against the couch cushions and looked at the ceiling. He'd spent 8 years in crisis response, which meant he'd spent 8 years arriving at situations that had already gone wrong and trying to understand the shape of them quickly before the shape got worse. You learn to think in terms of timelines and trigger points, what had already happened, what was about to. Can I ask you something that might be annoying? He said. Sure. Why tonight? Why a blind date? He looked at her. You're running a crisis inside your own company, and you came out for dinner with a stranger. She was quiet for long enough that he wondered if he'd pushed too far. Then she said, because I've been alone with this for 6 weeks, and I was losing perspective. She didn't look at him. I have advisors, I have lawyers, I have a VP of security. Everyone has something at stake in what I decide. They want me to win because they need me to win. She picked up her glass again. I needed one conversation with someone who had nothing at stake, who would just listen, without calculating their position while I talked. Marcus told you I was good at listening? Marcus told me you were the most straightforwardly decent person he knew. She said it matter-of-factly, like she was reading from a dossier, which I realize sounds like something someone says about a person who's boring, but the way he said it wasn't like that. Ethan smiled slightly. Marcus has known me since we were 19. He's seen me be plenty of things that aren't decent. Good, she said. That's actually more reassuring. He looked at her. She was staring at the window again, and in the lamplight she looked tired in a way that makeup and posture and whatever else she did to present herself could only half conceal. It was in the set of her shoulders and the small line between her brows that hadn't quite relaxed all evening. How long has it been since you talked to someone about something that actually mattered to you? He asked. Not business, not the company. The line between her brows deepened slightly. Define matters. You know what I mean. She thought about it. He watched her actually think about it, not just reach for a deflective answer. A long time, she said finally. I had a friend, my college roommate, Priya. We used to talk like that. She moved to Singapore 4 years ago. We text. It's not the same. No, he said. Texts aren't the same. Everything becomes texting eventually, she said, and there was something rueful in it. Everyone's too busy, including me, especially me. She exhaled. It's funny. I have more staff than I did 5 years ago, more people around me every day, and I talk about less. Actually talk. She shook her head slightly. I don't know when that happened. Ethan had an answer to that from his own experience, but he kept it to himself. He was listening. You said you consult for corporate clients now, she said, shifting, changing the channel slightly. Yeah, safety protocol assessments, crisis response planning, evacuation systems. He stretched his neck. I fell into it, honestly. One of the companies I did a training for had a VP who liked how I worked, asked if I consulted privately. Turned out there was actual money in it, so... He shrugged. It beats being on call at 3 in the morning and coming home smelling like smoke. Did you miss it, the field work? For a while. He thought about how to say the rest of it honestly. I was good at it. That's a hard thing to leave behind, being good at something that actually matters in the moment. He paused. But I was also running toward every emergency I could find, and at some point I realized I was doing that partly because it was an excuse not to be home, which wasn't fair to Mia. Adeline looked at him. Something in her expression had shifted. You knew that about yourself, she said, and you changed it. I tried to. He picked up his own glass. Some days are better than others. She was looking at him with an attention that wasn't quite what it had been earlier in the evening. It wasn't the first date assessment anymore. The initial reading of a person, trying to figure out what they were. This was something more specific, like she was looking at something she hadn't expected to find. You know what the worst part of the whole thing is? She said. The Victor Kane situation? Tell me. I can't show fear. I can't show any of it. She set her glass down again with a small, controlled click. Because the moment I look uncertain, the narrative writes itself. She's emotional. She's reactive. She's not fit to run the company. Her voice was even, but the words had some heat under them. I've been running a $12 billion company for 7 years, and I still can't walk into a room looking worried without someone deciding that proves something about women in leadership. She stopped, pressed her lips together. I'm sorry, I don't usually do that. You don't usually say true things out loud? I don't usually say them to people I've known for 2 hours. It's been closer to 3, he said. And I think you should say them more. She looked at him with an expression that was hard to read. Not suspicion exactly, but something guarded in the neighborhood of it, like she was waiting for the other part of the sentence, the part where he told her what he wanted for it. It didn't come, because he didn't want anything. He was just sitting on a hotel couch in a storm with someone who was interesting and tired and clearly hadn't had a real conversation in longer than she could pin down. Tell me about the rescue work, she said. What was the worst one? He thought about it. You want the worst or the one that stayed with me? Are they different? Yeah, he said. They usually are. She waited. He told her about a building collapse in Queens 4 years ago, before he'd left field work. A gas explosion, partial structural failure, 6 people trapped in a pocket of debris on the 2nd floor. They'd been in there 11 hours by the time his unit arrived. He described it the way he described everything from that period, not with the adrenaline version, which was the easy version, the one that made it sound clean and heroic. The real version, which was the part where he was 3 meters into a debris crawl in the dark, and the structure shifted above him, and he lay there for 45 seconds, completely still, listening, running a very fast internal calculation about whether to keep going. What did you decide? She asked. I kept going, he said, which probably says more about my risk tolerance than my judgment. Or about what you thought mattered more. Maybe. Did they make it? The 6 people? 5, he said. One of them, an older man, 70s. He was already gone when we reached them. The others were okay. Shaken up, some injuries. But okay. Adeline was looking at him quietly. And that's the one that stayed with you, not the worst one. The worst one is worse to talk about, he said simply. That one. The man who didn't make it, he had a photograph in his shirt pocket. Family photo, a little kid, maybe 4 years old, sitting in a yard. It was bent from the collapse, but not ruined. I don't know who kept it. It went with the other personal effects. He paused. I think about that kid sometimes. I don't know anything else about the situation, but that one detail stays with you. The rain tapped steadily at the glass. Why did you leave? She asked. The full version. He considered. Mia started having nightmares, he said. She was 4. I'd come home from a call and she'd be upset. She couldn't tell me why. She didn't have the language for it. But I knew it was connected to me leaving in the night, to the uncertainty. And one morning she woke up and climbed into bed with me and held onto my arm and said, Don't go anywhere, Dad. He looked at his hands. I put in my notice 2 weeks later. Adeline didn't say anything for a moment. She started, stopped. I was going to say that's a sacrifice, but That's the wrong word. Yeah, he said. It's not the right word. He looked at her. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was just the thing that obviously needed to happen. When you see it clearly, the decision isn't hard. Something crossed her face that he couldn't name exactly. Not sadness. Not quite. More like the specific feeling of recognizing something you've understood abstractly for a long time and are only now understanding in your body. She picked up her phone, set it back down, then picked it up again and this time looked at the screen. I need to check something, she said. I'm sorry, 1 minute. She stood and walked to the window, phone pressed to her ear. He heard her voice, low, clipped, controlled, and the conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When she came back, her face had done the thing again. The composure locked into place, but tighter than before. She sat down slowly. What happened? He said. Someone released a story to a financial news outlet. She set her phone face up on the table this time, and he could see notifications coming in even from across the cushion, the screen lighting up every few seconds. It's selective. It's not entirely false, which is the effective part. It uses real numbers from our Q3 filings and frames them as evidence of declining leadership. She looked at the window. It'll be on the front page of the financial section in the morning. Victor. Almost certainly. Or someone working for him. She sat very still. My communications director is managing the response, but there's not much to manage at midnight. The damage is already moving. Ethan watched her. The stillness wasn't the relaxed kind from earlier. It was the stillness of someone holding something carefully, afraid that moving too fast would break it. What do you need to do right now? He asked. She blinked. What? Right now, tonight. Is there anything that can actually be done in the next 8 hours that will change the position? She thought about it. He could see her running through it. The logistics, the options, the variables. Not much. My director will handle the initial statement. My legal team will have reviewed by morning. She paused. I should probably talk to my CFO. She glanced at the phone. But it's midnight. So call him. I'll be waking him up. He'll understand. I know, She stopped. There was something stiff in her expression, and it took him a second to recognize what it was. She didn't want to show anyone else, even her CFO, that she was rattled. Adeline, he said, call your CFO. That's what he's there for. She looked at him. Then she picked up the phone and dialed. He moved to the window to give her space, stood looking out at the street below, which was still flooded and empty. A single taxi moved through the water slowly, its headlights catching the rain in small, bright columns. Ethan thought about Mia asleep at home, the babysitter in the spare room, and the specific quiet of his apartment in the early morning when he was the only one awake. He thought about the man in Queens with the photograph. The call behind him lasted about 10 minutes. Then he heard Adeline say, "Thanks, Marcus." And he realized, absurdly, that her CFO was also named Marcus, and he almost laughed. She came back to the couch. Some of the tightness had gone from around her eyes. Feel better? He said. A little. She sat. He's handled it before. He's good. She tucked her feet back under her and reclaimed her wine glass. Thank you for saying to call him. You knew to call him. I needed someone to say it out loud. That was honest. He appreciated it. Can I tell you something? She said. Yeah. When Marcus, your Marcus, not my CFO, when he set this up, I almost canceled 4 times. She was looking at the coffee table, picking at the edge of a paper coaster. The night before, I canceled mentally about 12 times. I wrote the text and deleted it. She shook her head slightly. I don't really do this. Blind dates, meeting people for dinner with the intention of, I don't know, whatever the intention is. Connection, Ethan said. Right. That. She pulled a small thread from the edge of the coaster. I'm not good at it. I don't have a lot of practice with letting people close enough for it to be real. And there's always a reason not to. The company needs me. There's a board meeting. There's a crisis. There's something. She paused. I've been using the company as an excuse to not have a life outside of it for probably 5 years. Why, Ito? He said. Because it's easier. She looked up at him. If you don't let people close, you don't lose them. She said it flatly, like a thing she'd known for so long it had stopped feeling like a confession. He sat with that for a moment. Outside, a gust moved through and rattled the window in its frame. Rain ran sideways across the glass in long, diagonal lines. I did the same thing with work, he said. Different version of it, but the same thing. Running into burning buildings so I didn't have to sit still and notice what was missing. He looked at her. It doesn't actually work. No, she said, it doesn't. It just runs the clock. She nodded once, slowly. They sat in silence for a while, which was a different silence than the polite ones from dinner. This one had weight to it, and not an uncomfortable weight. More like the feeling after a long drive when you finally stop and turn the engine off and your ears adjust to the quiet. The promise, Ethan said eventually. You mentioned a promise to yourself. Why a blind date specifically? Why this method? She was quiet for a moment. I wanted to meet someone who didn't know me first, who formed an impression before they knew what I was worth. She paused. I wanted to know if there was still a version of me that someone could just like, without all of it. Her voice was careful on the last part, not fragile, but careful. For the record, he said, I liked you at dinner before I knew who you were. She looked at him. You were sharp and kind of funny, and you actually listened when I talked, which is rarer than it should be, he said. I was going to call Marcus on the way home and tell him it went well. She held his gaze for a moment, then she looked away, and her jaw moved slightly, and he realized with some surprise that she was holding something back. Not tears exactly. She didn't seem like someone who cried easily, more like the physical effort of accepting a thing you'd half stopped believing was possible. She started. I know, he said. You don't know what I was going to say. You were going to say something about how it's been a while since someone said that without wanting something from it. She stared at him. Marcus was right about you, she said finally. He usually is. Ethan stretched and looked at the window. Storm's not letting up. No. She followed his gaze. Pull-out couch is probably more comfortable than it looks, he said. There are extra pillows in the closet, she said. I've stayed here before. The closet shelf above the safe. She uncurled from the couch and stood, and she was barefoot, and something about that detail, the most powerful woman in the country standing barefoot on hotel carpet with mascara that had faded over the course of 3 hours and a paper coaster she'd picked apart, made him think that whatever the evening was, it had been something real. Get some sleep, he said. Whatever comes tomorrow, you'll handle it better rested. Probably. She picked up her heels from the floor, paused at the bedroom door. Ethan? Yeah. She seemed to be deciding how to say something, and then she decided to say it plainly. Thank you for tonight, for listening, for not, she gestured vaguely, for not being weird about any of it. It's been an interesting night, he said. That's one word for it. She went to the bedroom. The door didn't close all the way. It drifted open about 2 inches, which he figured was either the building settling or a habit of someone who'd spent too many nights alone in hotel rooms. He found the pillows on the closet shelf where she'd said they were. He pulled out the sofa bed, which was actually fine. Hotels in this range knew what they were doing, and lay on top of the covers with his hands behind his head, listening to the rain. His phone showed 3:15 in the morning. He texted Marcus a single line. Your friend is something else, man. Then he put the phone face down and stared at the ceiling for a while. He wasn't sure what any of this was yet. He wasn't sure what tomorrow looked like, whether they'd exchange numbers in the lobby while waiting for transportation and then let the busyness of actual life absorb whatever tonight had been, or whether something in what had happened between midnight and 3 in the morning was going to hold once the storm cleared and the city came back and they went back to being who they were in daylight. He didn't know. That was okay. He'd learned the hard way, and over time, that not knowing wasn't the same as losing. Outside, the rain finally began to ease, not stopping, just settling into something lighter and more sustainable, the kind of rain a city could get back to work in. The light in the room shifted slightly, the storm dimming by degrees, and somewhere below, he could hear the first distant sounds of the city starting to move again. A truck, a horn, the rhythm of a place that never fully stopped, just paused. He closed his eyes. On the other side of the door that hadn't fully closed, he heard Adeline shift once in the bed and then go still. The morning was going to come with whatever it came with. Victor Kane's story would be running in every financial feed in the country. Her phone was going to start ringing before 7. His own Tuesday was waiting for him on the other side of the East River. Mia at school, a client call at 11, dinner to figure out. But right now the rain was lighter and the room was quiet, and something about tonight, he knew, had already changed the shape of things in ways he couldn't fully see yet. He let himself not see them. Sleep came easier than he'd expected. He was up before 6. Old habit, the kind that didn't care what time you'd fallen asleep or whether the previous night had been ordinary. His body had an internal alarm that predated alarm clocks, predated fatherhood, predated everything. It went off at 5:52 and he lay still for about 30 seconds before accepting it and sitting up. The pullout was decent. His back wasn't complaining. The room was gray with early light, the storm fully gone, leaving the particular clean stillness that follows heavy rain, a city that had been washed and hadn't started making noise again yet. The bedroom door was still 2 inches open. He folded the pullout back into the couch frame, straightened the cushions, stacked the extra pillows on the end. Then he stood at the window with his arms crossed and looked at the street below, which was wet and quiet and beginning, slowly, to show the first signs of morning. A delivery truck. A woman with a dog. A man in kitchen whites moving fast on the sidewalk, already late for something. He checked his phone. A text from the babysitter sent at 11 the night before. Mia slept fine. All good. A text from Marcus at 6:04 this morning. The man was absurdly early for someone in finance, that said, "Saw the Hart International story. Your date okay?" Ethan typed back, "She's fine. I think. I'll tell you later." He ordered coffee from the room service menu on the small card on the table. 2 cups. It seemed like the right number. Adeline came out of the bedroom at 6:23. She was dressed, not fully, not the blazer and heels version from last night, but dark trousers and a white shirt, sleeves pushed up, hair down, and still slightly damp. She had her phone in her hand and was reading from the screen with an expression that had gone flat and controlled in the way that meant the information on it was not good. She looked up when she heard him move. "Coffee's coming," he said. She looked at the small table where he'd set out the cups in anticipation, like he'd known when she'd arrive. She almost said something, then didn't, and sat down in the armchair. "How bad?" he said. "The article is running in 4 places now. 2 financial outlets, 1 business general, 1—" She paused, jaw tightening. "1 lifestyle site that frames it as a leadership question. Is Adeline Hart losing her grip?" She said the last part with a flatness that was more effective than anger would have been. "That's clickbait," he said. "People know the difference." "The investors who matter don't read it for the narrative," she said. "They read it for the Q3 references. Those are real." Victor pulled real numbers and put them in a real article through a journalist who owes him something. She set her phone face down on the armchair arm. "It's a legitimate hit piece. That's why it works." Room service knocked. Ethan got the door, brought the coffee over, set a cup near her. She picked it up without looking and drank. "What does your morning look like?" he asked. "My car is 20 minutes out. I have a call at 7:30 with legal, 8:15 with my communications director, 9 o'clock with my CFO in person." She looked at the window. "And at 11, I have an emergency board meeting that Victor Kane requested last night at 10 p.m. Ethan set his cup down. He called the board meeting himself. He did. While the article was still running. He must have known it was coming out. He timed the meeting request to follow within an hour. Her voice was steady. "He's calling it a leadership review, emergency session under the bylaws." She paused. "He has enough signatures, 3 other board members. I confirmed it at 5 this morning." Ethan was quiet, thinking. "He's not trying to embarrass you," he said. "He's trying to force a vote before you have time to build a counterposition." She looked at him. "Yes." "And the article is the setup. He creates the optics problem, then calls the emergency meeting while the story is still hot. So the board members who are on the fence read it as validation that something's actually wrong." You understand corporate maneuvering pretty well for someone who does rescue work, she said. I understand how people create emergencies to control outcomes, he said. The mechanics are the same. Different stakes, but same logic. He picked up his coffee again. What do you have going into that 11 o'clock? 7 years of performance data. Strong earnings 3 of the last 4 quarters. Investor satisfaction metrics above the industry average. She said it clinically. And a documented pattern of irregularities I've been building for 6 weeks that I haven't been able to attribute to Victor with certainty yet. But you're close. I'm close. She pressed her fingers briefly against her temple. There are 3 transaction sequences I've been tracking in the subsidiary accounts. The pattern suggests someone has been redirecting infrastructure maintenance contracts, overcharging externally, skimming the margin internally. Whoever's doing it has access to the level 2 approval chain, which is executive tier. She paused. Victor has level 2 access. 15 other people do too. But the timing fits. The timing fits his pattern of behavior. That's not evidence. No, Ethan agreed. It's not. They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the city was getting louder by degrees. Traffic building. The particular percussion of New York coming back to speed. What would you need to make it evidence? He asked. She looked at him. Why? Because you said you've been looking at this alone for 6 weeks, and you're close but not there, and you have 5 hours before a board meeting. He held her gaze. Tell me what you need. There was a long pause. Not hesitation exactly, more like she was deciding whether to trust the offer at face value and doing the calculation honestly rather than reflexively. The contract documents are internally stored, she said. I need to show that the companies receiving the inflated contracts are connected to Victor directly, not just to Hart International. If I can show he has a financial relationship with at least 2 of them, the transaction pattern stops being a coincidence. Corporate registration records are public, Ethan said. Or they should be. Yes, in theory. She pulled her knees up and rested her chin on one, looking at her phone. The issue is the shell company structure. He's good. 3 layers minimum. If you go looking in Delaware registry records, you find a holding company that's owned by another holding company that's managed by a firm in the Caymans. She shook her head. My lawyer's been pulling on it, but it takes time to trace. Ethan was quiet. He was thinking about something specific, a texture he recognized from old work, the kind of crisis situation where the obvious routes are blocked, and you have to think about what's available, not what's ideal. What about the contractors themselves, he said. Not the ownership structure, the actual companies doing the work. Infrastructure maintenance. Those are real businesses. They have employees, physical locations, public profiles. She looked at him. If you can show the work build doesn't match the work done, he said, you don't need the ownership chain. You just need to prove the contracts were fraudulent on their face. Victor's access to the approval process becomes the mechanism, not the proof. But fraudulent contract execution is already a problem regardless of who orchestrated it. She was very still. Do you have the contract documentation, work orders, completion reports, inspections? He said. I have the financial records. The work orders would be in our operations system. She uncurled slowly. I have access to that system. I just haven't looked there because I was focused on the financial trace. She stood up. If the completion reports show work that wasn't actually completed, or was completed at a fraction of the cost claimed, Ethan said, that's embezzlement independent of the shell structure. She was moving now, not physically, but internally. He could see it. The shift from contained and careful to fast and purposeful. I have 5 hours before the board meeting. 4.5, he said. You have a 7:30 call. She looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her yet. Not the composure, not the guarded warmth from late in the night, not the bone-tired honesty of 3 in the morning. This was something else. Focused. Alive. You figured that out faster than my legal team did, she said. Your legal team was looking for the complicated answer, he said. Sometimes the simple one is right there. She grabbed her blazer from the back of the chair where she'd draped it the night before and shrugged into it. Then she stopped, turned back. Come with me, she said. He looked at her. To the office, she said, and she was aware of how that sounded, he could tell, because she said the next part faster. Not to... I have 4.5 hours, and I could use someone who thinks the way you just thought. She paused. My legal team thinks like lawyers. My CFO thinks like a CFO. You think like someone who arrives when things are already wrong and tries to understand the shape of them quickly. She held his gaze. I could use that this morning. He thought about his 11 o'clock call, thought about whether he could move it. He could move it. Okay, he said. She blinked. Okay? Yeah. He stood up. Let me get my jacket. Her car was a black sedan, which was either a town car or something very close to it, and the driver, a heavyset man named Carl, who had apparently been with her for 4 years based on the easy familiarity with which she said his name, didn't react to the fact that his employer was arriving at 6:50 in the morning from a hotel that was not her apartment, accompanied by a man in a slightly wrinkled blazer. Carl was good at his job. The drive uptown was 20 minutes in light traffic. Adeline spent it on her phone, a rapid, focused series of texts to people whose names Ethan didn't know. And Ethan watched the city from the window. The streets were still wet but busy now, the morning rush building, the city back in its rhythm, as if the storm had been a rumor. Hart International's offices occupied the top 9 floors of a building on Park Avenue in the 50s. The lobby alone was the kind of space that made you aware of the distance between your circumstances and someone else's. High ceilings, marble floors, the subtle visual language of serious money. The security desk knew Adeline. The elevator required a card. She was on the phone before they reached her floor. He stayed quiet and followed, which was its own skill, knowing when you were support and not lead, when your job was to be available rather than present. He'd been good at it in field work. You didn't make noise when other people needed to concentrate. Her office was on the 44th floor corner with 2 walls of glass. She went straight to her desk and logged in, and Ethan sat in one of the chairs across from it and waited. Operations system, she said, more to herself than him, navigating. Contract documentation for infrastructure maintenance, Q1 through Q3 this year. She pulled up what she needed and went quiet, reading fast. He could see the reflection in the window behind her, the screen, her face lit by it, the quick movement of her eyes across data. She had the particular focus of someone who knew exactly what they were looking at and was running it against something in their head. He watched the city out the window. 44th floor meant he could see a long way. The park to the north, the dense grid of Midtown below, a narrow slice of the East River in the far distance catching the morning sun. Brooklyn was somewhere past all of that. Mia was getting ready for school right now. There was a specific routine that was mostly non-negotiable, with exactly 1 point of flexibility around whether the cereal went in before or after the milk, which Mia took seriously as a philosophical question. He texted the babysitter. I'll be a little late. Nothing wrong. Something came up. Can you do school drop-off? The response came back in 2 minutes. Of course. Tell Mia I said hi. Ethan. He looked up. Adeline was looking at her screen with an expression that was very controlled and very intent. Come look at this, she said. He walked around to her side of the desk. She was showing him a series of contract documents, work orders, completion certificates, payment records. The format was bureaucratic and dense, but he followed the logic of it. This facility, she said, pointing to a project code. Infrastructure maintenance contract, $2,400,000, approved in February. Completion certificate filed in April. She scrolled. Now, look at this. She pulled up another window. An internal inspection report from the same facility, dated June. The inspection 6 weeks after the certificate of completion notes that the listed maintenance work, 3 of the 5 items, shows no evidence of having been performed. He read the inspection report carefully. Who filed this? A junior facilities manager named Torres. It went into the system in June, and it appears nobody above operations level ever looked at it. She scrolled further, because the payment had already been authorized and the contract was closed. $2.4 million, he said, for work that was either partially or not performed. She clicked to another project, then another. This one, March contract, 1.8 million. Completion filed in May. She pulled the corresponding inspection. Similar issues, 2 of 4 maintenance items unverified. How many contracts total? He said. She was already running the search. I'm filtering for the same vendor IDs. She waited. Numbers populated. 11 contracts in 14 months. Total value. She stopped. Ethan looked at the number on the screen. $26 million. They were both quiet for a moment. Victor personally approved 7 of these 11 contracts, she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear something underneath it. Not shock exactly, but the specific feeling of confirmation landing after weeks of suspicion. The other 4 went through his deputy, who reports directly to him. Do you have the vendor registration? Ethan said. She pulled it. A company called Meridian Infrastructure Solutions, registered in Delaware. 1 address, which was a registered agent service. No website, no physical location in any of the cities where work was supposedly performed. Shell company, she said. Or close enough, he said. But you don't need to prove the shell structure anymore. You have completion certificates for work that facility inspections show wasn't done. That's fraud on its face. The approval trail leads to Victor. He straightened. This is your 11 o'clock. She was already reaching for her phone. I need to call my CFO. And your lawyer, he said. Not in that order. She dialed, and this time she didn't move away from him to make the call. She sat at her desk and talked fast and precise, and he stepped back to the window and gave her the space he could while still being in the room. It was 7:42 in the morning. She had just found the thing that could change the board meeting from a threat to a reversal. He could feel the shape of it from where he stood. The trajectory of the morning had shifted, the way trajectories shifted in field work when you found the structural load-bearing element and realized the collapse wasn't inevitable. He let himself feel quietly satisfied about that, which was its own specific feeling, separate from pride, more like the comfort of a problem finding its solution. The next 2 hours were not his story to tell in the way the night had been. Lawyers arrived. Her CFO, whose name was David Marcus, not Marcus from The Blind Date, and the coincidence continued to feel absurd, arrived at 8:30, large coffee in hand, and spent approximately 4 seconds registering Ethan's presence before deciding it was irrelevant to what needed to be done and moving on. Adeline's communications director, a brisk woman in her 40s named Sheila, came in at 8:45 and immediately began drafting what she called a counter-narrative, which was apparently a real thing. Ethan sat in a chair near the window and mostly stayed out of the way. At one point, Adeline's legal counsel, a sharp-faced man named Reed, who had clearly been in this kind of fight before, pulled up the vendor documentation Ethan had suggested looking at, and Adeline said, "That angle came from him," with a gesture in Ethan's direction, and Reed gave him a look that was simultaneously assessing and grudgingly approving before going back to his laptop. At 9:15, Adeline called him over to the conference table, where the 4 of them were working. "I need you to walk Reed through the logic you used," she said. "The inspection report versus the completion certificate. He's building the presentation for the board, and he needs the thread to be clean." Ethan sat down across from Reed and walked him through it the way he'd walked through crisis scenarios 100 times, not performing expertise he didn't have, but describing what he'd observed and why it mattered, in plain language. Reed asked 2 sharp questions, got 2 clear answers, and went back to typing. The operation had its own momentum now. Ethan stepped back again and let it move. He found himself near the window again, looking north toward the park. His phone showed 9:41. He had a call at 11 he'd already moved to noon. Mia's school day was underway. The city was doing what it did. "Hey!" He turned. Adeline was standing next to him, coffee in hand. Behind her, Reed and CFO David were arguing quietly about the order of evidence presentation, and Sheila was on a call in the corner. "You okay?" he said. "I'm good," she said, and this time it meant something different than it had in the restaurant the night before. "I'm actually good." She looked out the window. "Reed says if the board sees this morning, they'll table the leadership review indefinitely, probably permanently." "And Victor?" He'll either resign or face an internal investigation with real teeth. She paused. Possibly both. She turned the coffee cup in her hands. He thought I'd come into that meeting alone and shaken after a bad news cycle. He didn't account for... She stopped, gestured vaguely. Last night, he said. Last night, she agreed. He looked at her profile. The line of her jaw, the set of her shoulders, which were different this morning than they'd been over dinner the previous night. Not relaxed exactly, still taut, but pointed forward rather than braced. You would have found this anyway, he said. Maybe not by 11 this morning, but you would have found it. She considered that. Maybe, but maybe after the vote. She looked at him. Timing matters. It does, he said. They stood at the window for a moment. Outside, a plane traced a line across the high pale sky above the park, moving south. How's your morning? She said. It was a strange question in the context, almost mundane against the backdrop of what was happening in the room behind them, but it was also the first time she'd asked it, the first time there'd been a pause long enough to ask. My morning is fine, he said. I moved my 11 o'clock. I need to be home by 2:30 to do school pickup. What time does she get out? 3:15? I like to be there early. He paused. She doesn't like crowds when school lets out. It's a lot of people all at once. So I get there early and stand near the corner of the fence where it's less busy, and she finds me. Adeline was quiet. She knows where to look, he said. Because you're always in the same place, she said. Yeah. She looked down at her coffee cup. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to manage or neutralize. Just let it be there for a second. Ethan, she said. Yeah. I'd like... She stopped, took a slow breath. When this is over, today, I'd like to take you to dinner, somewhere normal, not a reservation under a fake name. She looked up at him. If that's something you'd want. He thought about the restaurant from the previous night, the way she'd sat down across from him and said her name wasn't Addie, the storm against the glass, the conversation that had stretched past midnight without either of them noticing. Yeah, he said. I'd want that. She nodded once, looked back out the window, and he had the sense she was sorting through something private, some feeling she'd take the time to name later when the morning wasn't still running at full speed. Adeline, Reed called from the conference table, I need you to confirm the Q2 approval chain documentation before I finalize. She turned back toward the table, paused, looked back at Ethan once. You can head out when you need to, she said. And thank you for this morning. I didn't do much, he said. You noticed what everyone else missed, she said simply. Then she went back to the table and the room closed around the work again, and Ethan stood at the window a moment longer before picking up his jacket from the chair. He let himself out quietly. In the elevator going down, he felt the particular tiredness of a night that hadn't included much sleep and a morning that had moved fast in a direction no one had predicted. It was a familiar tiredness, not unpleasant. In the lobby, he texted Marcus, his Marcus, 3 words. It went well. His phone rang 40 seconds later. He let it go to voicemail and pushed out through the revolving door onto Park Avenue. The sun was actually out. The sidewalk was still damp from the previous night's storm, and the air had the clean, slightly electric smell that follows heavy rain, like the city had been reset. Taxis moved past. A food truck was doing early business on the corner. 2 women walked past arguing in rapid-fire Spanish about something involving a cousin. New York, back to itself. He found a subway entrance 2 blocks south and went down into it. And on the platform he thought about the previous 18 hours. The restaurant, the corner table, the butter curl, the storm, the hotel room, the pull-out sofa, 3 in the morning, and a woman who hadn't fully let herself need anyone in years sitting sideways on a couch telling him the truth. The train came. He got on. He had a noon call to make, a client report to finish, and a corner of a school fence to be standing at by 3 o'clock. But for a few stops, he let himself sit with the particular feeling of a thing that had started and hadn't finished. The sense that the storm and the night and the morning had set something in motion that was going to keep moving regardless of whether it was convenient, regardless of whether either of them was fully ready for what it asked of them. That feeling wasn't frightening. That was the part that surprised him most. The train moved through the dark, and above him the city went about its business. And somewhere on the 44th floor of a building on Park Avenue, Adeline Hart was walking into the hardest room of her professional life with evidence she'd found at 7 in the morning after a night she hadn't planned, and she was going to walk out of it with everything still intact. He was almost certain of it. The train surfaced briefly between stations, and through the scratched window he caught a long, flat view of the East River in morning light, silver and wide, moving south the way it always did, unhurried, indifferent to the storms that passed above it. He pulled out his phone and texted the babysitter to pick up a specific kind of cereal on the way home, the kind Mia sorted by color before eating. The train went back underground. The board meeting lasted 3 hours and 11 minutes. Ethan knew this because Adeline texted him at 2:17 in the afternoon. One line, no punctuation. It's done. He was standing at the corner of the school fence, early as promised, when his phone buzzed. He read the text, typed back how bad was it, and pocketed the phone. A woman near him was on a call, her voice rising and falling with whatever her afternoon had already brought her. 2 kids who'd somehow gotten out early were kicking a bottle cap back and forth on the sidewalk. The sun was doing its late October thing, bright but thin, the kind of light that looked warmer than it was. His phone buzzed again. Victor walked out before the vote. Reed thinks he'll resign by Friday. Then, 30 seconds later, I'll tell you the rest tonight if you still want dinner. He typed back, I still want dinner. The school doors opened at 3:15 exactly, and the controlled chaos of 140 kids finding their people began in earnest. He moved to his spot at the corner of the fence, the same spot every day, slightly set back from the main gate, in the shadow of the concrete pillar where it was quieter, and waited. Mia found him in under a minute. She always found him fast, which he took as something, though he'd never said so to anyone because it would have sounded like he needed the reassurance, which he did, but that wasn't the point. She came through the gate at a slight run, backpack bouncing, wearing the expression she wore when she had something to tell him that couldn't wait. Dad, she said, arriving in front of him. We did weather and science. Yeah? He took the backpack without being asked. We learned about cumulonimbus, which I already knew, but Mrs. Fenton didn't know I knew, and I told her, and she said, I was right. Mia considered this as they started walking. She seemed surprised. Mrs. Fenton probably wasn't expecting it, he said. I know. Mia was quiet for half a block, processing. Was there a storm last night? It was loud. Yeah, pretty big one. I slept through most of it. She looked up at him. Where were you? He'd thought about how to answer this since morning. The honest version for a 6-year-old was, I was at a hotel because of the storm, with a woman I'd just met who turns out to be someone important, and we stayed up until 3 in the morning talking about things that mattered, which I haven't done in longer than I want to admit. The practical version was shorter. I got stuck because of the flooding, he said, but I texted Camille and she took care of everything. She made eggs, Mia said, with the tone of someone reporting a minor but noted deviation from normal. Was that bad? Mia shrugged. They were okay. She reached over and took his hand, which she did sometimes still, and would probably stop doing soon. And he didn't think about that directly because that was the kind of thought that snuck up on him from behind. Can we have pasta tonight? Yeah, he said. We can have pasta. He made dinner and helped with homework and read 2 of the 4 books in their current rotation. And after Mia was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and his phone and thought about what Adeline had said in her office that morning. Standing at the window, coffee in both hands, asking him to dinner with the specific tone of someone who didn't ask for things easily and knew it. He didn't know what this was becoming. He had a general policy against thinking too hard about things before they became anything definite, because thinking too hard early was a way of either ruining something before it started or building something in your head that the reality couldn't match. He'd learned that from the first year after Diane left, when he'd spent so much energy imagining how things might go that he'd exhausted himself before they went anywhere at all. So he put his phone down and washed the dinner dishes and went to bed at a reasonable hour, which felt like its own small accomplishment. She called at 9 the following morning. Not a text, an actual call, which told him something. "I'm sorry," she said when he answered. "Is this too early?" "I've been up since 6, he said. "What's going on?" "Nothing bad." A pause. "Actually, nothing bad. I'm not used to calling someone with nothing bad." He heard something in the background, the muffled acoustics of an office. "Victor submitted his formal resignation an hour ago. Reed is already building the referral package for the DA's office." "That's fast," he said. "When the evidence is clean, lawyers move fast." Another pause. "I wanted to tell you before you heard it from somewhere else. I don't know if you'd have heard it from somewhere else, but it felt right to tell you directly." "I'm glad you called," he said. "Okay." A third pause, shorter. "About dinner?" "Yeah. Tonight feels too soon. The next 2 days are going to be cleanup, statements, investor calls, internal communications. I'm going to be in the building until 8 both nights." "Thursday," he said. "Thursday works," she said. "Somewhere normal. You pick." "I'll pick somewhere that isn't $400 a plate." "I wasn't complaining about the restaurant last time." "Neither was I," he said. "But my definition of a good dinner and your definition of a good dinner might look different, and I'd like to test my theory." She was quiet for a second. "What's your theory?" "That you'd like somewhere with good food and no one watching who you are," he said, which is a smaller Venn diagram than it should be, but it exists. The pause that followed was different from the others. Warmer somehow, with less of the careful calibration he'd noticed in her speech patterns, the way she measured everything before releasing it. "Thursday," she said. "Text me where." He picked a place in the West Village that Marcus had taken him to twice, a small Italian spot with 12 tables and a chalkboard menu, and the specific unself-conscious quality of a restaurant that had been doing the same thing well for 20 years and didn't feel the need to announce it. He'd texted Marcus for the reservation, and Marcus had called back immediately because Marcus was constitutionally unable to let anything proceed without comment. "You're taking Adeline Hart to dinner," Marcus said. Not quite a question. "I'm taking Addie to dinner," Ethan said. A beat. Those are the same person." "I know." "You understand who she is." Marcus. "I know who she is," Ethan said. "She knows who I am. It's dinner. Can you get the reservation?" Marcus got the reservation. Thursday came with the particular briskness of late October turning the corner toward November, the air having made its decision about the season and committed. Ethan wore different clothes this time. He'd thought about it for maybe 10 minutes and then stopped himself because 10 minutes was long enough. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, boots he'd resoled twice because they fit right. He was practical about his own comfort and not especially worried about impressing people with his clothes, which was either a confidence or a failure of self-presentation, and he'd made peace with not knowing which. She was already there when he arrived, not at the table. At the bar near the door, coat still on, a glass of water in front of her. She was looking at her phone, but she put it away when he came in, and she was wearing dark jeans and a camel-colored coat over a dark top, and she looked, he thought, like herself rather than a version of herself she was presenting to a room. "You're early," he said. "Habit," she said, and the callback landed between them with the small, warm weight of an inside reference that was 3 days old but felt older. "I got here and realized I'd copied your strategy from Tuesday without meaning to." They were shown to a corner table, not screened from the room, just a corner, with a candle in a short glass and a chalkboard on the wall behind them, listing the specials in someone's imperfect handwriting. The dinner was different from the one at Maison Verlaine in ways that had nothing to do with the price or the decor. At Maison Verlaine, they'd been feeling the shape of each other at distance, careful and calibrated. Here they started somewhere past that. Not intimate exactly, but honest. Like the conversation had been running since Tuesday and they were just picking it back up. She told him about the board meeting. Not the professional version, not the sequence of events and strategic outcomes, but the actual version, which was that she'd walked into that room at 11 o'clock having slept approximately 2 hours in a hotel, having spent the morning with a lawyer and a CFO and a man she'd known for 24 hours, finding $26 million in fraudulent contracts. And when she'd sat down at the head of the table and seen Victor Kane 3 seats to her left looking at her with the particular expression of someone who believes they've already won, she'd felt something that she described as close to fury, but cooler, more useful than fury. "He looked sorry for me," she said. "That was the tell. He'd already written the room in his head. He thought he was walking in to watch me defend myself." She picked up her wine. "I let him think that for about 4 minutes. Reed opened with the operational data, which is boring, and Victor sat back a little, relaxed, and then we moved to the contract review." "What did his face do?" Ethan said. "His face did absolutely nothing," she said. "Which is its own answer. Most people's faces do something when they're surprised. Victor's went completely still." She set the glass down. "He knew he was done in about 30 seconds. He asked for a recess. Reed said we'd continue. He walked out at minute 40. And the rest of the board? The ones he'd brought with him were very quiet for the second half of the meeting." She looked at the candle. "One of them, Margaret Chen, she's been on the board for 4 years and I've always had a professional relationship with her. She came to find me after and apologized. She said she hadn't known the full picture." "Did you believe her?" Adeline thought about it. "Partially," she said. "I think she knew something was off and chose not to look too carefully. That's not the same as being complicit, but it's not innocent either." She paused. "I'll trust her less, but I won't burn it down." "That's probably right," he said. "I learned something about knowing the difference between someone who actively hurt you and someone who just wasn't paying attention at the wrong time." She looked at him. "The response should fit the thing, not just your feelings about it." He nodded. That tracked with everything else she'd shown him about how she thought. Their food came. The pasta was good, not fancy, not dressed up, just correct in the way that things made by people who cared about one thing specifically tend to be. Adeline ate without apologizing for it, or picking at it, which he noticed and appreciated in the uncomplicated way he appreciated things that were simply consistent with who a person actually was. "Can I ask you something?" she said, about midway through. "Sure." "The inspection report angle, the way you got there." She put her fork down and looked at him. "You said crisis responders arrive when things are already wrong and try to understand the shape quickly. What does that actually mean, in practice? What are you looking for?" He thought about how to explain it. "Discrepancy," he said. "When you arrive at a scene, everything tells you a story. What the structure looks like, where the fire is, what people tell you. But sometimes the story doesn't match the physical evidence. And the gap between what you're being told and what you can actually see, that gap is where the real problem is." She was listening with her full attention. "With Victor, you had 2 separate systems that were supposed to be describing the same reality," he said. "Completion certificates on one side, facility inspections on the other. They should match. They didn't. That gap, that's where he was hiding." He paused. "It's the same principle as finding a structural failure in a building. The break is always at the point where the 2 things stopped agreeing with each other." She sat with that for a moment. "I looked at those contracts for 6 weeks," she said. "I followed the money. I looked at the corporate structures, the approval chains, the financial patterns." She shook her head slightly. "I never thought to look at whether the work itself was real." "You were looking for the complicated version," he said, "which was also there. You would have found it. But you found the simple version in 45 minutes. Because I didn't know what I was looking for," he said. "I just looked at what was in front of me." He picked up his own glass. "Sometimes not knowing the field is an advantage. You don't have a theory to protect." She looked at him with an expression that he was beginning to recognize, the one she had when something landed differently than she'd expected and she was deciding what to do with it. "My father had a saying," she said, and something in her voice shifted very slightly on the word father. "He said the problem with experts was they could only see what their training had taught them to look for." She paused. "He was talking about business. He applied it to everything." "He sounds like someone worth listening to," Ethan said. She looked at the table. He was. A short pause. He died 4 years ago. Heart attack. Very fast. She said it the way people say things they've said many times. Not without feeling, but with the feeling organized, managed, put in the place where it lived rather than running loose. He left the company in worse shape than I think he knew, or maybe he knew and didn't have the energy to fix it. I was never sure. And you fixed it, Ethan said. I tried. She looked up. It took a long time to stop being angry at him for leaving it the way it was. For leaving, she stopped. For leaving when he did. She picked up her wine. We didn't have enough time to finish the conversation. That's what it feels like there was a conversation that isn't finished. He knew that feeling. He didn't say so yet because it wasn't the right moment, and he'd learned to read the right moment. Tell me about your brother, he said. She looked at him sharply, just for a second. Marcus, he said. You're Marcus. My friend. He mentioned when he was setting up the dinner that you had a brother. He didn't say anything else, just, it came up. She looked at the candle. The flame was small and steady in the still air of the corner. Owen, she said. The name arrived in the space between them with a weight that he hadn't expected. Not because of what she'd said, but because of what happened to her face when she said it. Not grief exactly. Something older than grief. Something that had been grief once, and had become part of the permanent structure of her. He was 4 years younger than me, she said. He'd be 26 now. A pause. He died 8 years ago. Rock climbing accident in Colorado. A rope failure at the anchor. She said it evenly, the way she said the things that were hardest. With all the feeling interior, visible only in the smallest things, the slight change in breathing, the way her fingers moved once on the stem of the wine glass. He was with a group. There were other people there. It was a certified route. It was just one of those things that shouldn't happen and does anyway. Ethan didn't say he was sorry. He hated when people said that, not because it was wrong, but because it was usually a way of ending the space rather than holding it open. He stayed quiet and let her continue if she wanted to. She wanted to. He was the person in my life who knew me, she said, without any performance, without any of the version of me that I put together for other people. She looked up briefly. Siblings do that for each other, I think. They know you before you've decided who you're going to be, so they have this version of you that doesn't exist anywhere else. She paused. When I lose something now, and it really gets to me, I notice that I want to call him. It still happens. 8 years later, I still have that reflex. What was he like? Ethan asked. Something in her face shifted toward something more like warmth, the particular warmth of a memory that was painful and good at the same time. Loud, she said, with a short, sudden, almost laugh. Argumentative. He had an opinion about everything and absolutely no filter about sharing it. He would have hated about 40% of my business decisions and told me exactly why. She paused. He made me laugh, real laughing, the kind that hurts. She looked at the table. I don't do that enough anymore. I'm not sure who I do it with. Ethan thought about what she'd said on the night of the storm. It's been a long time since I talked to someone about something that actually mattered. He was understanding now what had been underneath that. After he died, she said, I worked. I know it's not an original response to grief, but I worked like the company was the thing that mattered most because if I stopped moving fast enough to catch my breath, I had to feel what was actually there. She looked up. I told myself I was building something, and I was. But I was also just running. From what? He said, though he thought he knew. From the fact that I was alone, she said, and that I'd chosen it. Not once, not as a decision I made clearly, but in 100 small daily ways. Canceling plans. Letting friendships go quiet. Not starting things because starting things meant they could end. She paused. You can do that for a long time without noticing, and then one day you look up, and the last person who really knew you is gone, and you've replaced all the space with work, and it's efficient, but it's empty. She said the word without drama, just as an accurate description of a condition. Victor almost taking the company made me realize I'd made the company into a substitute for everything else, which means if I lost it, I actually had nothing. Ethan set his fork down. That's not true, he said. She looked at him. You had yourself, he said. Which isn't nothing. I know it feels like nothing from inside it, but it's not. She held his gaze for a moment. Easy thing to say from the outside. Yeah, he said. It is. He paused. I'm saying it anyway. She looked at him for a long moment. Tell me yours, she said. The version you haven't told me. He knew what she was asking. She'd given him something real, and she was asking for something real back. Not as a transaction, but as equilibrium. The thing that happens between two people when one of them has gone further into honesty than they usually go, and the room needs to balance. He thought about where to start. When Diane left, he said, I told myself it was fine. I told myself Mia was fine. I was fine, we'd be fine, and I ran the household like a rescue operation. Logistics, systems. I was good at it. He looked at the candle. What I was not good at was admitting that I was scared. Not of being alone. I could handle alone. I was scared that I was going to do to Mia what Diane had done to both of us. That I was going to be there physically and somewhere else emotionally, which is the real version of leaving, the one that doesn't require a note on the kitchen counter. Adeline was very still. I noticed I was doing it, he said. The work, the calls, the running toward every emergency, because at least in an emergency, I knew what to do and I felt useful. Mia would ask me something simple and I'd be half present for it, and I'd see her notice, and the look on her face when she noticed. He stopped, let out a slow breath. That look was the thing that finally got to me. She wasn't angry, she just looked patient, like she'd learned to be patient with me. He shook his head slightly. A 4-year-old shouldn't have to be patient with her father. Adeline's hand moved on the table. Not toward him, just a shift, like she was stopping herself from reaching across. What did you do? She said quietly. I got therapy, he said. For about 8 months. I hated it for the first 3. Then I hated it less. Then one day I said something out loud that I'd been thinking for 2 years, and the therapist just waited, and I realized that saying it hadn't killed me. He paused. And then I started actually being present for Mia instead of performing being present for Mia, which sounds like a small difference, but isn't. It's not a small difference, she said. No. He looked at her. The thing is, I knew what was wrong. I knew what I was doing. Knowing doesn't fix it. You have to actually do the different thing, and the different thing is harder than the broken thing because the broken thing is familiar. She looked at him for a long time. The restaurant was quiet around them, other conversations low and ambient, the particular warmth of a room full of people engaged with their own evenings. I need to do something different, she said finally. I think you already started, he said. She looked at him with a question in it. Tuesday night, he said. You came to dinner with a stranger on purpose. You told the truth to someone who had nothing to gain from your success. That's not nothing. He paused. You're already doing it. She looked down at her hands on the table. One of them, her left, turned over slowly, palm up, a gesture that wasn't directed at him exactly, but was visible, open, like something she wasn't hiding. After a moment, he reached across and put his hand briefly over hers. Not a hold, just a contact, brief and honest. She didn't move, didn't pull away, just let it be there for the length of a slow breath. Then he took his hand back and they both picked up their wine glasses, and the candle between them made both their faces look warmer than the room was. And outside on the West Village street, the October night moved past the window in its ordinary way. People and light and the small, continuous noise of a city that didn't stop for anyone's most important moments. Owen would have liked you, she said. She said it simply, not as a compliment wrapped in another compliment, just as a fact she'd arrived at. He liked people who said true things in plain language. He had no patience for anything else. He sounds like someone I would have liked too, Ethan said. She smiled. Not the controlled, calibrated social expression, the real one, smaller and less even, the one that did something to her eyes. He was terrible at poker, she said. He thought he was good, but he was transparent. You always knew exactly what he had. The best people usually are, Ethan said. Yeah. She looked at the table. Yeah, I think you're right about that. They stayed until the restaurant started clearing around them, until the candle had burned down to a short stub and the chalkboard specials were only half visible in the dimmer light they'd switched to for the back half of the evening. They closed out the check. He paid before she could, not as a point, but just because he'd been intending to since Thursday and he'd gotten there first, and walked out into the cold of late October with their coats on. On the sidewalk, she stood close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. This was better than the first dinner, she said. Different, he said. Better, she said, with a quiet certainty that he didn't argue with. They stood there for a moment in the cold, the West Village street moving around them with its own momentum, a couple walking a dog, a bike courier cutting through, music from somewhere a block south, thin and fading. There's something I haven't told you, she said. The way she said it was different from the casual disclosures of dinner, something more deliberate underneath it. He looked at her. Owen, she said. The accident. The rope failure. She stopped, looked at the street. I was supposed to be on that trip. Same group, same route. I canceled the week before because of a work thing, a deal that couldn't wait, or I thought it couldn't wait. She paused. It could have waited. It was not actually a thing that couldn't wait. Her voice was very even. Owen went without me. It was the kind of thing we did together, and I wasn't there, and he went anyway, and... She stopped. He didn't say anything. I've spent 8 years wondering if it would have been different, she said. If I'd been there. If I'd have seen something, said something, caught something before it happened. She looked up at him. My therapist years ago told me that was magical thinking, that there was no reason to believe my being there would have changed anything. She paused. She was probably right. Intellectually, I know she was right. But you still carry it, he said. I still carry it. She said it with the specific flatness of someone who has accepted a thing without being able to put it down. And I think that's part of why I made the company what I made it. Not just grief, not just running, but this, obligation. Like if I built something big enough, good enough, it would justify the fact that I stayed behind and he didn't. She shook her head, which doesn't make any logical sense. It doesn't have to make logical sense, Ethan said. It makes human sense. She looked at him. We assign meaning to things, he said. It's what we do. Sometimes the meaning we assign is wrong or irrational, and it's still real because we put it there. He paused. Doesn't make you responsible for what happened. I know, she said. I'm working on actually believing it. That's different from knowing, he said. Yes, she said quietly. That's the hard part. They stood on the sidewalk a moment longer. A cab went past with its light off. The music from a block south had shifted to something slower. Walk me to my car, she said. Not helpless, just asking. Yeah, he said. They walked half a block in the cold, shoulders not quite touching, and outside the building where Carl was waiting in the black sedan, she turned to face him, and the streetlight was behind her, and she looked like someone standing at the edge of something and not afraid of the drop. Thursday next week, she said. You already have Thursday next week planned? He said. I have an opinion about Thursday next week, she said, which is that I want to see you again. I have the same opinion, he said. She looked at him with something in her face that was too complicated to be one thing, relief and warmth, and the specific vulnerability of someone who is choosing to want something after a long time of not permitting herself to. Good, she said. She got in the car. He stood on the sidewalk and watched the sedan pull away. And then he stood there another moment in the cold because the night was clear and the street was quiet, and something in the last hour had shifted the weight of things in a way he needed a moment to register. He started walking toward the subway. His phone buzzed. Marcus. Because Marcus had a radar for these things. How'd it go? He typed back. She told me about her brother. A pause. Then, yeah. Then, she doesn't tell people about Owen. He read that twice, pocketed the phone. The subway entrance was half a block ahead. Above him, the sky was the particular dark amber of a city night, never fully dark. And somewhere to the east across the river, his apartment was waiting with Mia asleep in it and the cereal on the shelf and the books in their rotation. And all of that was his life. The real texture of it, and it was enough. It turned out, more than enough. He went down the stairs into the station, and behind him the West Village street went quiet, in the way streets go quiet after something that mattered has just passed through. Victor Kane resigned on a Friday. The formal letter went to the board at 9 in the morning, 2 sentences, no explanation, no apology. By noon it had leaked. These things always leaked. And by 2 o'clock the financial news cycle had turned completely. The same outlets that had run his planted story about Adeline's declining leadership now running pieces about the internal fraud investigation at Hart International and the abrupt departure of a longtime board member. The narrative had reversed itself with the speed and indifference of water finding a new channel. That was how these things worked. The story went where the facts pointed, and the facts now pointed somewhere else entirely. Adeline sent Ethan a text at 2:17 that said, "It's official, he's gone." He was in the middle of a client call, a mid-sized logistics company in New Jersey, reviewing their emergency evacuation protocols, and he stepped out into the hallway to read it. He typed back, "How do you feel?" The reply took 4 minutes, which meant she was thinking about it rather than reaching for the easy answer. Tired, relieved, strangely not as satisfied as I thought I would be. He understood that. He'd felt it after difficult rescues that ended well. Not the triumph you expected, but something flatter and more complicated. The specific letdown of an adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. He typed, "That's normal. The thing you were braced for is over. Your body doesn't know what to do with the space." Another pause. Then, "When did you get a psychology degree?" "Took a night class," he typed. "Call me later if you want." She called at 7, after Mia was in bed. He was washing the dinner dishes, and he propped his phone against the backsplash and let her talk while his hands were in the water. She talked for almost 20 minutes. Not about the business mechanics. Those were handled. Reed had it. The DA's referral was moving. She talked about the feeling of sitting in her apartment that evening for the first time in weeks without a fire to put out, and how the quiet had felt wrong initially, like something was missing, before she'd understood that what was missing was the crisis she'd been using to avoid sitting still. "I ordered takeout," she said, "ate it on the couch, watched 40 minutes of a nature documentary and fell asleep." A pause. "I woke up at 10 and thought about how that was maybe the most normal evening I'd had in 2 years, and that's a problem I made for myself." "Sounds like you're already working on it," he said. "I'm trying." A pause. "Mia's asleep?" 45 minutes ago." He dried his hands. "She drew a picture of a storm cloud at school today, labeled all the layers." A short laugh came through the phone, unguarded, the kind he'd first heard at the restaurant that night and hadn't forgotten. "Cumulonimbus, with an arrow and everything," he said. "The teacher framed it, apparently." "That kid," she said softly, not performing warmth, just feeling it. They'd been doing this for 6 weeks by then. The Thursdays had become a standing thing without either of them formally declaring it standing. They'd just both started planning around it. There had also been a Sunday afternoon in the park, which had happened because Adeline had mentioned she couldn't remember the last time she'd walked somewhere without a destination, and Ethan had said he and Mia were going to Prospect Park the following weekend, and she was welcome if she wanted. She'd said yes before he finished the sentence, which he'd noticed and said nothing about, because some things were better not turned into a point. That Sunday had been the first time she'd met Mia. He hadn't staged it. He'd thought about whether to, had run through the mild anxiety of introducing a 6-year-old to a person who mattered in a context that was still new and not fully defined, and then decided that staging it would be worse than just letting it happen. Because Mia was perceptive in the way children were perceptive when they hadn't yet learned to ignore what they noticed. They'd met near the carousel, which was Mia's landmark for the park. Everything was navigated relative to the carousel. Adeline had arrived in jeans and a jacket, with her hair down, looking somewhat different from the woman in the 44th floor office, and Mia had looked at her with the flat assessment of someone who had no social motive and was simply taking information. "You're Addie," Mia said. "I am," Adeline said. "You're Mia." "Dad talks about you," Mia said. Ethan had looked at the middle distance. "Does he?" Adeline said. "He says you're smart," Mia said. Then, with the total lack of transition that was one of her defining qualities, "Do you know about clouds?" Adeline had looked at Ethan briefly, and he'd seen the specific expression of someone trying not to show that they found something delightful. "Tell me about clouds," she'd said. Mia had told her about clouds for 11 minutes. Adeline had asked 4 questions, all of them real questions, not the performed interest adults usually brought to children's obsessions, the slightly too enthusiastic nodding that kids clocked immediately, and Mia had answered with the detailed satisfaction of someone who had found an unexpected peer. On the walk back through the park, Mia had walked between them for a while and then drifted ahead slightly, the way she did when she'd accepted a situation and stopped monitoring it. "She's remarkable," Adeline said quietly, not loud enough for Mia to hear. "I know," Ethan said. "I can't take much credit. She just came out that way." "You can take some credit," Adeline said. "She's confident without being obnoxious about it. That's not accidental." He'd thought about that for several days afterward. The DA's investigation moved through December with the grinding patience of legal processes. Reed gave Ethan a brief update in mid-December, at Adeline's request, because Ethan had found the initial thread, and Reed, for all his compressed professional manner, believed in closing loops. The Meridian Infrastructure Solutions contracts had been fully audited. The total fraudulent billing came to just over $28 million over 16 months. Victor Kane had been formally charged on 4 counts, including wire fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His lawyer had already begun negotiating, which Reed described as encouraging, which apparently meant Victor was going to cooperate rather than fight, which would shorten everything. "He thought she'd fold in the boardroom," Reed said on the phone, with the tone of a man reviewing a chess game someone else had played poorly. He'd seen her hold the company together through hard markets and a restructuring and 2 years of a difficult regulatory environment, and he still thought that. It's a particular kind of arrogance. "The kind that underestimates people it thinks it understands," Ethan said. "Exactly," Reed said, and hung up, because Reed didn't do extended calls. Adeline told him the rest of it herself, on a Thursday in the second week of December, at a different restaurant this time. A small Korean place in Koreatown that Ethan had been going to for 3 years, that cost $32 for 2 people, including drinks, and was the best meal in that price range he knew how to find. She'd shown up, looked at the menu for 30 seconds, and said this place was perfect, which he believed because she didn't say things she didn't mean. They'd been talking for 2 hours when she said, "I want to tell you something about what's next. For the company." He waited. "I've been doing some restructuring of the governance," she said, adding independent oversight on the executive approval chains, creating a direct audit function that reports to the full board rather than through the CFO. She paused. Things that would have caught this earlier if they'd been in place. "Good," he said. "I'm also—" She stopped, restarted. "I'm stepping back from some of the day-to-day operational decisions, promoting 2 of my senior VPs to share the operational load." She looked at him. "I've been running the company the way I've been living my life. Everything coming through one point, no redundancy, no backup." She paused. "That's not a smart system. If one thing fails, everything fails." "Crisis response principle," he said. "I got it from somewhere," she said dryly. He smiled. "The point is," she said, "I'm trying to build something that doesn't require me to sacrifice everything else to keep it standing." She looked at the table. "Because I want to have something else. I'm ready to have something else." She said it without looking at him, which he understood, because some things were easier to say to the middle distance. He didn't make her look up. He just said, "That sounds right." And then, because she deserved more than that, "I'm glad." She looked up at him then, and something in her expression was the clearest he'd seen her. Not the composure, not the managed warmth, not the careful CEO in a boardroom, but just a woman across a restaurant table who had made a hard thing and was telling someone she trusted about it. "There's something else," she said. "Okay." "I started talking to a therapist again." She said it matter-of-factly, no apology in it. "I stopped about 3 years ago because I told myself I didn't need it anymore," which in retrospect was, she made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh, a misread. "What made you go back?" he said. She looked at him directly. "You told me about going, about it being useful." A pause. And I thought, if he can say that plainly, then maybe I can just do it without making it a thing. He didn't say anything for a moment because he was processing the specific weight of that. The idea that something he'd said about his own experience had changed something in hers. He wasn't sure how to hold that exactly. It felt important in a way that didn't need to be talked about too much. "How is it?" he said. "Hard," she said. "She's very good. That might be why it's hard." She picked up her drink. "We've been talking about Owen, about the guilt, about the work as substitute pattern." She paused. "She uses the word avoidance a lot. I'm beginning to understand why." "It gets less hard," he said. "You said that about the first 3 months," she said, "that you hated it." "Yeah." "I'm in month 2, she said, "so I'll trust you on the trajectory." Outside the restaurant window, Midtown was doing its December thing. The lights, the crowds, the peculiar compressed energy of a city in the last weeks of the year when everyone was trying to finish something. Ethan watched a group of people walking fast on the sidewalk, all of them in coats, all of them somewhere to be, the endless human traffic of a city that never fully exhaled. He thought about what he wanted to say and how to say it without making it more than it was or less than it was, and then he said it the way he said things when they mattered, plainly. "You know what I notice about you?" he said. She waited. "You're harder on yourself than any evidence warrants." He looked at her. "You built a $12 billion company from a failing one. You caught the fraud in your own organization when everyone else missed it. You walked into a boardroom on no sleep with evidence you found in 4 hours, and you took the room back." He paused. "And you still talk about yourself like someone who's barely holding it together." She was quiet. "I'm not saying you don't have things to work on," he said. "I have things to work on. Everybody does." He paused. "I'm saying the story you tell about yourself doesn't match what I see." She looked at him for a long moment. The restaurant noise moved around them. The kitchen sounds, other conversations, a burst of laughter from a table near the back. "Owen used to say something like that," she said finally. Her voice was careful on his name, the way it always was. Not fragile, just precise, like she was handling something she valued. "He said I was the only person he knew who apologized for being capable." She paused. "I thought he was wrong. I'm starting to think he wasn't." "He sounds like he was usually right," Ethan said. "Irritatingly, yes," she said. And the smile that came with it was the real one. The uneven, unguarded one that reached her eyes and made her look for a moment completely like herself. They walked out into December cold an hour later, and this time on the sidewalk he reached over and took her hand, not briefly the way he had at the restaurant table weeks ago, but properly, with intention, and she let him, and they walked half a block like that before she said, "Where are we going?" "I have no idea," he said. "Good," she said. "Me neither." They kept walking. January came, and with it the settlement news. Victor Kane accepted a plea agreement in the second week of the month, agreeing to full restitution of the misappropriated funds, plus penalties, surrender of all vested company equity, and a cooperation agreement with prosecutors pursuing the Meridian infrastructure chain. He avoided prison on the condition of cooperation, which was the legal outcome and not the moral one, but legal outcomes rarely were. Adeline told Ethan about it on the phone the evening it was finalized, and her voice was the same as it had been when Victor resigned, not satisfied in the way she'd expected, just finished. The long, complicated thing was over, and now she had to figure out what to do with the energy she'd spent on it. She figured out what to do with it by putting it somewhere more useful. Hart International announced in February a foundation focused on infrastructure safety. Not a PR gesture. Ethan could tell the difference, and this wasn't one. It was funded at a level that meant it was real, staffed by people who knew what they were doing, focused on facility safety standards in underserved communities where the kind of maintenance fraud Victor had run went undetected longest because no one was watching closely enough. Adeline announced it at a company-wide meeting and said plainly that the company had experienced a failure in oversight that had cost real money and real trust, and this was one way of making the failure mean something. Ethan heard about the announcement from Adeline that evening, not from the news, which meant she'd called him first. "The foundation," he said. "Infrastructure safety." "You sound surprised," she said. "Not surprised," he said. "Just, it's a good thing to do with it." I had help thinking it through, she said. With the direction? Who? He said, though he had a sense. My therapist, she said, and someone who explained to me how the gap between two systems is where the real problem hides. A pause. Turns out that principle applies to communities as much as to contracts. He stood in his kitchen, thinking about the way one night's conversation could travel forward through time in directions you hadn't anticipated, touching things you couldn't have predicted from where you'd been standing at the beginning. Addie? He said. Yeah. That's a real thing, he said. What you're doing, it matters. I know, she said quietly. That's actually the first time in a while that I've said that and meant it. Spring arrived the way New York springs did. Not gracefully, not in a single transition, but in argument, cold days bullying their way into warm ones, the city changing its mind about the season every 48 hours before eventually capitulating to the inevitable. Ethan kept showing up at the corner of the school fence. Mia kept having opinions about cereal and cloud formations and the ethical status of horseshoe crabs. Adeline kept coming to Thursdays, and the Sundays in the park became a semi-regular thing that none of them had formally established, but all of them seemed to count on. Mia had, over the course of several months, conducted what Ethan could only describe as a thorough evaluation of Adeline, the way children evaluated people who entered their household's orbit, not with explicit criteria, but with a cumulative attention to small things. Whether someone was honest when you asked them a direct question, whether they paid attention when you talked, or were just waiting for you to stop, whether they were the same from one visit to the next, or whether they changed based on who else was in the room. She delivered her verdict in her characteristic fashion, which was with no preamble on a Sunday evening in March, while Ethan was making dinner and Adeline was at the kitchen table helping Mia with a drawing project that had grown ambitious in scope. Dad? Mia said, not looking up from the paper. Yeah. Addie can come every Sunday, Mia said. A short silence in the kitchen. Can she? Ethan said. Yes, Mia said with complete authority. I decided. He heard Adeline at the table make a quiet sound that she immediately controlled, but not before he caught it. The sound of someone receiving something they'd half stopped hoping for. I'll let her know, Ethan said, and went back to the stove, and the kitchen was warm, and the drawing project continued, and outside the March evening pressed against the windows in its undecided way. Later, after Mia was asleep, they sat on the couch with the television off and the apartment quiet, and Adeline had her feet tucked under her the way she did when she'd stopped performing comfort and was just comfortable. She was reading something on her phone with the low attention of someone winding down rather than working. She decided, Adeline said, without looking up. She decides most things, Ethan said. She's going to run something someday, Adeline said. A company or a country or a weather station. Something. She'd be good at the weather station, he said. She'd be good at all three. She lowered her phone. Ethan. Yeah. I want to say something, and I want to say it clearly because I don't always do that with things that matter. She looked at him. What this has become. With you. With Mia. She paused. I didn't know this was something I could still have. I thought I'd moved past the point where it was available. Not because of age or anything external, just I'd convinced myself I'd made choices that made this category of thing unavailable. She shook her head slightly. I was wrong about that. He looked at her. I'm not wrong about a lot of things, she said with a small self-aware edge. But I was wrong about that. Yeah, he said. You were. She looked at him for a moment. That's it? Yeah, you were? What did you want me to say? I don't know. Something. I think you were wrong too, he said. And I think you figured out you were wrong before it was too late, which is the important part. And I think Mia is going to make you explain cumulus versus cirrus formations before spring is over, and you should probably study. He paused. And I'm glad you're here, on my couch, with your feet tucked under you, being a person instead of a CEO. He looked at her steadily. Is that something? She held his gaze for a long moment. Then something in her expression settled, Not softened, because she wasn't soft exactly, but settled, like something that had been held at tension, finally finding the position it was meant to be in. Yeah, she said. That's something. There are things that only become visible in the rear view. The moments that mattered most looking exactly like ordinary evenings while they were happening. A conversation in a hotel room during a storm. A cup of coffee on a conference room table. A hand briefly covering another hand at a restaurant table. A 6-year-old deciding, with complete authority, that someone was allowed to come every Sunday. Ethan had spent a long time believing that the most important things he'd done were the ones that looked like heroism. The building collapse in Queens, the fire seasons in Colorado, the hours in the dark with the structure shifting above him while he calculated the risk and decided to keep going. And those things mattered. They were real. He didn't regret any of them. But the things that had changed the actual shape of his life were quieter. Leaving the job when Mia needed him to be present. Sitting in a therapist's office for 8 months and hating it, and going anyway. Standing at the corner of a school fence early every single day so his daughter always knew where to find him. And one ordinary Tuesday evening, putting on a navy blazer that was fine and going to dinner with a stranger. The lesson he kept coming back to, the one that took the longest to actually learn as opposed to understand, was that strength didn't look like what he'd been trained to think it looked like. He'd spent years in a field that rewarded the visible version, running toward the fire, holding the structure together alone, not needing backup. And he'd been good at it. But the thing that actually required more from him, that asked more of whatever he had, was the willingness to stop performing it, to sit still, to say what was true, to stand at a fence and wait. Adeline had a version of this learning that was her own, shaped by different material but arriving at the same place. She'd built something remarkable out of a real idea and 7 years of relentless work. She'd protected it when someone tried to take it. She'd done those things alone, and they'd cost her more than they should have, and the cost had been paid by the parts of her life that didn't show up on an earnings report. What she'd been wrong about was the things so many people were wrong about. The idea that needing people was a liability. That letting someone close was a structural weakness, a point of failure, a risk that the math didn't support. She'd built her entire professional philosophy around redundancy and distributed systems and backup chains, and she'd been running her personal life on a single point of contact with no failsafe. The night of the storm had not fixed this. A single night didn't fix anything. What it did was introduce enough information to change the calculation, which is all any night can do. Victor Kane entered a federal monitoring program and began the long process of paying back what he'd taken. The foundation launched with a ceremony in April that Ethan attended as himself, not as Adeline's +1 or a figure in the Heart International story, just as a person she'd wanted in the room. He stood near the back during the remarks and watched her speak. Not the careful, calibrated CEO from the boardroom, but someone who'd found the balance between competence and honesty and was working that register in public for the first time. She talked about failure in plain language. She talked about what the company had gotten wrong and what they were trying to make right. She didn't make it inspirational in the packaged way. She just made it true. Afterward, Marcus, found him by the drinks table and said, "You look good." "I'm standing at a foundation launch," Ethan said. "You look good in general," Marcus said. "Whatever this is, it's agreeing with you." Ethan thought about that and concluded it was accurate. Mia attended the foundation launch because Adeline had asked, and Mia had said yes before Ethan could clarify that it was an adult event with speeches. And then Mia had sat through the entire thing without complaint, and afterward asked Adeline 3 questions about infrastructure safety, with the focused interest of someone who had already decided this was a topic worth understanding. Adeline had answered all 3 questions seriously. Mia had filed the information and moved on, which in Mia's world was the highest form of approval. They drove back to Brooklyn that evening, the 3 of them in Carl's car, Mia asleep against the window before they'd crossed the bridge, her face relaxed in the particular total surrender of a child's sleep. The city moved past the windows in its spring form, still lit, still moving, the bridge cables sliding past in their regular intervals. Adeline was looking out her window. Ethan was looking at her profile. "Hey," he said. She turned. "You did good today," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "I had help," she said, "in the early days of figuring out what this should be." She glanced at Mia sleeping between them on the seat. Both kinds. The bridge ended and Brooklyn opened up ahead of them. The grit of it, the familiar density of streets he knew well. The neighborhood that was his, in the way places become yours when you've lived and failed and figured things out inside them. He reached across the sleeping 6-year-old and took Adeline's hand. She turned it over and held on, and they rode the rest of the way through Brooklyn like that. A specific kind of quiet between them. Not empty, not performing, just two people who had both been through the version of things where you carry everything alone, sitting in a car with a child asleep between them, holding on. Outside, the city was doing what cities did, moving forward, indifferent and full of life. And inside the car, something ordinary was happening, just people coming home, which turned out to be everything.